Hey everyone, I am coming to you live from my voice booth. It turns out that a lot of you found my last video on how to make your own voiceover demo really useful, which is awesome. It was lovely to read all of the nice comments from people who that video helped. But off the back of that, I've been getting a lot of questions about how I treat my audio. And so I thought now would be a good time to do a follow-up video to that video to show you what I currently do to treat my vocals. Before we dive into the technical stuff, I want to say a couple of things about audio engineering. First of all, I am not a qualified audio engineer. I have a law degree, I have a business degree. I do not have a degree in audio production, post-production, editing, any of that. What I have learned is all from my years working in voiceover, editing, re-editing my audio, watching other audio engineers edit my audio, paying to work with various audio engineers, ear training, all of the things that I've done, a bit of on-set sound operation, that's where my knowledge comes from. What you will learn when you start doing this is your ears get better and better over time. And what I mean by better is you're going to start to hear stuff that you never noticed before. And once you start hearing it, you can't unhear it and you'll start to notice a lot more things that most people don't, but that'll just make your audio better and better. I just mentioned something called ear training. There's this thing you can do online. It is a resource that was developed as an addition to the book Audio Production and Critical Listening by Jason Corey. Online, free to access. If you have read the book, it'll explain how to use it, but I used to do this every day. It turns audio into almost a game, but it helps you start working out what different frequencies sound like, what audio sounds like if it's missing frequencies. That I found was a very useful thing to do. So I will link that down in the description for anyone who wants to check it out. The book itself is very dense. I read it. It is designed and targeted at those becoming audio engineers. So it may be more than what you want to know. But as voiceover artists today, especially with home studios, we are 50% audio engineer. So I found it was a very good thing to read and learn about because that's half of my job. I am by no means an expert at audio engineering. An audio engineer might look at this and think, what is she doing? But at the same time, if you give a recording of my voice in the same setup with the same equipment to two different engineers, they are going to engineer the audio. They are going to do what they do differently. And the audio will sound slightly different. Everyone has their own way of editing audio. Every different setup, different equipment will lead to a different edit, every different voice. So what I do to my audio in this booth, which is already very well sound treated and soundproofed, may be different to what you have to do. But I've always found it interesting to see how others edit their audio because it gives you an idea of what you might want to do to yours. Also, it's highly likely that this process I'm showing you now will have changed in 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 months because every couple of months I go back and I sit down and I look at it and I change it and if I've learned something from an audio engineer, I change what I'm doing to get better. And that is exactly what's going to happen to yours, especially in the first few years of you editing audio because you're going to improve so rapidly that you're going to listen to what you did a month ago and think, what was I doing? The second thing I want to mention is the aim of the game when you are capturing audio is to get it right when you are capturing it. It is not to fix it in post. You want to make sure you can capture the audio cleanly with as fewer plosives, sibilant sounds as possible so you don't have to do a lot to it on the back end. Editing audio is not about fixing audio. Sometimes it can be if something goes slightly wrong, but it is mostly about enhancing it, making it sound better than it already did. It's the same thing as when you're on set filming and you'll hear people say sometimes jokingly, we'll fix it in post, i.e. we'll send it to the editors and they can have the headache of fixing it. That's not what you want to do. You want to make sure your setup and the treatment of your space is so good that you're not going to have to do a lot on the back end. So if you haven't already taken a really good look at your space and your mic technique, I'd say that's your starting point before you even get to the recording and the treatment of your audio. Now that we've gone through the housekeeping, I'm going to jump into my computer and tell you about how I edit my audio. Okay, so this is my DAW, my digital audio workstation. You can see here that I have a clip on the track already. That's just a little piece of dialogue I've recorded for the sake of showing you how I edit my audio, because we don't want to waste time watching me record the piece of audio. This is what I use. It is called Reaper. This is what I use to record and treat my recordings. The effects that we're going to be using today, I use either the Reaper default effects, or there's a piece of software I've purchased called Isotope RX10 Advanced. They're up to RX11 now, I believe. It's just the updated version of the same effects. And I find those invaluable when it comes to treating audio. There's a lot of voiceover artists I know that also use that software. The advanced one, there's 3 different subscriptions. The advanced one is overkill. You don't need the advanced one. Standard is fine, and the basic one probably has the effects that I'm going to use today, so you could even just get that. It's also a tech company, so they always have sales, so wait for a sale, and then you can buy these if you want them. Now, every different DAW is going to have a different set of effects built in. I used to use Adobe Audition. They had a really good set of built-in effects. I did like them. I did not like their subscription model, so I stopped using that DAW. Reaper is a one-time fee. Their built-in effects I don't think are quite as good. That's why I use the additional ones, but you can get a pretty decent treatment going just with the basic effects in Reaper. The Isotope RX10, the external effects that I have, that was a one-time fee, which I also like, and you can use them either in their own Isotope RX editor, so I can take it out of the DAW and use it in its own piece of software, or I can use them as VST3 plugins, which basically means you can see on the side here, I'll turn these on, I have a whole bunch of effects on here. I can use the external effects on my tracks within this editor so I don't have to put it in a separate piece of software, which is fabulous, saves time. We'll not mute that, we'll turn those back off. Right, so I went ahead and recorded a piece of audio just so we can work on it. I've used, Comma Has a Cure, Comma Gets a Cure. It's a piece of text that was written because it has all of the phonetic sounds in English in it, so they use it a lot for accent work. But I find it's very good because there's a lot of sounds in there that we will be able to hear very clearly when we are editing. So I'm just going to play this for you. I do have effects on the track here. They are turned off. They are blue. So this is just the raw audio you're going to hear. I'll explain to you after I've played it why I have those there already. So here is Comma Gets a Cure, Comma Has a Cure. I need to find out the name. Well, here's a story for you. Sarah Perry was a veterinary nurse who had been working daily at an old zoo in a deserted district of the Territory. So she was very happy to start a new job at a superb private practice in North Square near the Duke Street Tower. Okay, short clip, short and sweet. Now, the reason I have these effects here already is because I save a preset. So when I'm going through doing my auditions, all I have to do when I want a new track is right-click, insert track from template, and you can see here I have a template I've created. It inserts the track with all of the effects already on it, with all of their settings saved, so that, yes, I do have to open some of them up and change them a little bit while I'm going, but this makes it so much quicker than going through and adding each effect. So that is how I usually start, even if I'm going to be recording something for a demo reel or for a client job. I start with that. I can take these off easily, I can change them, but it's a great spot for me to start with because I know that this makes my voice in my booth sound quite good. The first thing I do, so I've got my audio, I've got it on this track, I'm going to turn that off, is I normalize my audio. So I highlight, say this was different clips. Say I'd stitch together 3 different clips to get that reading. I'd highlight all 3 of them and I would go to, item processing, normalize items. I would normalize to peak. So I want my peaks to fall at -4 dB. Normalize as if one long item. So it's going to normalize all of the clips together versus all of them individually. And I just bring up the level. This is not destructive editing. So the actual file you've recorded that is in the folder, wherever you recorded it to, will not be impacted by doing that, even though it looks like it has. The reason I do that is because this preset over here, all these effects that I put on there, specifically the compression, is set at a certain level. So if my levels are always changing, which they do as you record audio, I have to go in and really adapt the compression every time, which I don't often want to do. So this just brings it up, makes it nice and loud, and is a good starting point. I like to make sure that my audio levels are nice and loud, just generally. There is a reason for that, so I'm going to take a quick detour and talk about that. When you are recording something, you are recording with a particular use case in mind. Say, for instance, if you're recording a documentary narration, it's going to be on Netflix, or it might be on YouTube, or you might be recording an ad for Spotify that's going to go on the Spotify platform. Each of these platforms has their own specifications when it comes to audio. For example, Netflix requires peaks to be no louder than -2, and your average LKFS, they use a different measuring system, for your average volume is -27. YouTube requires peaks be no louder than -1 dBFS, and average volumes sit around -14 LUFS. LUFS indicates your average volume of sound over the entire period, and that's what I'm used to seeing. I believe LKFS is K-weighted somehow. But basically, it's just your average volume and your peaks are the loudest moments. Each platform has a different specification for what they should be, and the reason for that is, think about TV. If you're watching a movie and it's really, really quiet and you've got to turn the volume all the way up just so you can hear what they're saying, and out of nowhere a commercial break starts and it's 5 times as loud in volume and you get deafened and you have to turn it back down and you're sitting there the whole time in the movie just riding the volume dial, that makes for a really unenjoyable experience for the viewer. The reason these platforms have this consistent standard for volume is so that they can make sure that the viewer has a better time. Everything is consistent. Nothing is particularly loud. Nothing is particularly quiet. The viewer's not going to get deafened when one show finishes and another starts. That being said, we're obviously not producing our audio for Netflix or those things. With voice demos or voice auditions, voice clips, usually we're just intending that the audio will go either on our website or on YouTube if it's a demo, or if it's client work, usually it's online videos if you're editing it yourself, or on the casting platforms. If you're submitting an audition, it'll go to a casting director who will listen to it on their computer or on their phone. So we don't need to necessarily worry about, the average volume has to be at this exact spot. Not necessarily. What you do want to make sure is that the volume of it is nice and loud. I like to follow the YouTube specifications and make sure that peaks are no louder than -1 dBFS. I tend to sit more at -3 dBFS, but I'm okay if something goes up to -1. And my average volume I keep between -14 and -23. Because I know then that if my audition is listened to in a sea of 1,000 other auditions, it's going to be a pretty consistent volume with the other people that are in there. Because if the casting director sets their volume on their computer, just a regular volume that they would listen to things, maybe on YouTube, and they start going through auditions, if they get to yours and yours is 2 to 3 times quieter than everybody else's, they may not waste their time turning the volume up. They might just skip past you. And you don't want to do yourself a disservice in your auditions or in your demos by just because the volume's too quiet or because you've cranked it far too loud. So I like to stay in that ballpark when I'm editing. You also want to make sure you're on top of your peaks. I said -1 dBFS for YouTube, but I like to keep it around -3 because a lot of these online platforms, if you are uploading a lossless format, a WAV file, an uncompressed audio file, they likely will compress it. And so if you've got a little bit of headroom up the top, if they do compress it, they're not going to crush your audio. So your audio will be safe. That is the reason I stick to that ballpark when I am editing audio. Back to the preset. The first thing I do, I'll turn all my effects on so we can listen to them, is I gate my audio. What that means, this is regate. This is just the default gate within Reaper. What this means is that I set a threshold, so you can see here it's 41.7 or -41.7. Anytime the volume of the audio gets above that, the gate opens and lets the audio through, and anytime it goes below that, it closes and doesn't let any sound through. The reason that I do this is usually just as a means of breath control for auditions, because I cannot be bothered going through, editing out all of the breaths, which is what you would usually do when you book the job. If it is commercial or often corporate, they will get rid of those. But that takes a long time. So I apply a light gate just to decrease the breaths and make it sound, sometimes like I'm less out of breath when I'm having to read how many words a minute. I use this. Gating can also be used as a way of controlling noise. I do not recommend it because there is going to be noise under your entire track if you have noise. So if you just let a gate open and the audio comes through that gate when you are talking, the gate's open, the noise is going to come through too, and then you're going to get this weird sound every time the gate opens and closes and the noise comes back in. I hate it. If you have noise in your recording, you need to look at your recording space, ideally. Alternatively, I do like the voice denoise, which is an isotope RX effect. That, of all the noise reduction plugins I've tried, seems to be the least aggressive. So if you do have a bit of noise, that is what I would use. Usually you won't see, for the most part, or I haven't seen it, audio engineers using noise reduction because they have the proper space to record in. You don't get any noise, you don't need to reduce for it. So what I do with this gate is I set it at a very, very low quiet level so I can make sure all of my audio is let through that gate for the most part, and it's just the breaths at the very bottom that I get rid of. I have a very fast attack and a bit more of a sustained release because I don't want to cut off the ends of my words. I use this thing. Now, I still don't know how to pronounce this, and I don't want to look it up because I like saying hysteresis, and I know that's probably not it, but that's how I'm going to say it. What this does is it closes the gate later than when it opens. So, for instance, I've got minus 41.7 is when the gate opens to let the sound through. Hysteresis means that I am closing the gate at minus, 49, minus 49. And the reason I do that is because if you drag on the trails of your sounds at the end of your words, which I often do, because I've got a bit of vocal fry going on, and it's, say, that at the end of a sound, the gate might close and cut it off and it's going to sound unnatural. So I don't want that. So I add a bit of that in there. The other thing I do over here, wet and dry, the wet recording is your process signal, so what you are going to hear with the gating. The dry signal is your unprocessed signal. So that would be the signal with my breaths in it. Usually that's at minus infinity because you don't want the dry signal in there. I want the dry signal in there. I put a lot of it back in so that the gating is not as aggressive. The breaths are still there. The sound is still there. It's just being reduced. And sometimes I get rid of this gate entirely because it really sometimes isn't necessary. Sometimes I think this is a really natural read. I want to hear my breathing. Next, I put on the RX10 De-Esser. Here we are. These RX effects are really tiny when you use them within Reaper. I don't know why. It's very annoying. But what I like about these RX10 effects or RX11 is that there's not a lot of parameters. They're very simple. They work really well. And you can do this thing down the bottom, output S only, which is it'll output only what the effect is removing, which I think is very, very useful. I use this de-esser to reduce the sibilant sounds, so the s, f, those aggressive sounds with a big pop of air. Yes, over my mic, I already have a pop filter, which helps control that, but sometimes the sibilant sounds are a very aggressive frequency, and sometimes you just want to dull that down a little bit. That is where a de-esser comes in. What I do here, I set my cutoff frequency, which is the frequency level above which, anything above that level you set, that will be acted on by the de-esser. I set mine at around 4760 is where I've found mine works. Sibilant sounds usually fall within the 5 to 8K range, which is why I've got it set almost at 5K. But you can play around with that, and with any of these effects, if you scroll the bar up and down, as you are playing through the audio, you can start to hear where it is having an effect, where it's having too much of an effect. So just slowly scroll through as you're listening to your audio. Then you've got your threshold over here. I have mine. This is the one I'm really going to scroll up and down and listen to. You can hear very clearly with your threshold when your S's are being crushed too much because it starts to sound like you're lisping. And you don't want that. The way this works is an absolute button down here. If you select the absolute button, -6 is -6 dBFS or -6 dB on your meter. Whereas the way it works by default is a relative amount, so it looks at the levels you have overall. And so -6 dB is not actually -6 dB, it works in a relative way. I like to leave it that way. All you have to do is just scroll up and down here, and we'll do it in a second so you can hear what I'm talking about. So if I highlight this and loop it, I'm going to scroll through here, and you'll start to hear as I go down, you'll hear me lisping, and as I come back up, I will stop lisping. Well, here's a story for you. Sarah Perry was a veterinary nurse who had been working daily at an old zoo in a deserted district of the Territory. So she was very happy to start a new job at a superb private practice in North Square near the Duke Street Tower. Well, here's a story for you. And you can see on this meter here, this meter next to it shows the reduction in dB when a sound is affected. As I get really, really far down, the reduction is much greater. You are compressing those sounds a lot, and you don't want that. It doesn't need to be aggressive compression. So if I go back to -6-ish, another way to listen to this more clearly, if you couldn't hear that, was if you tick output S only, it'll show you just the sounds that are being affected by this effect. And if you're only hearing the aggressive, plosive, and sibilant sounds, those sorts of sounds, that's good. When you start hearing other sounds that are being impacted, you don't want that. Who'd been working daily at an old zoo in a deserted district of the Territory. So she was So you can see where I have it at -6, it was getting 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 dB of reduction on the aggressive sounds. It didn't sound like I was lisping, and you could see when I went right down the very bottom, it started to, all my other words started coming in as well, and they were being affected, and you certainly don't want that. That's my De-Esser. Then I have 2 sets of EQ on here, re-EQ. These are both, they're the exact same effect, but I just do 2 different things with them. This is the default Reaper EQ effect. The first one I use as a high-pass filter, which means that it filters out any low frequencies. It lets anything above a specified frequency through. The reason I do this is it doesn't impact my voice, but if I did catch any low-end rumbly sounds, because low-frequency sounds travel a long way. It's why when a flight is going over and you're in your house and you're probably a very long way away from the plane, you can feel the rumble, you can feel that sound. It's those lower frequency sounds. I just filter that out. Then I have the EQ where I actually do a bit to my vocals. EQ is one of those things where it's going to be different engineer to engineer. It is very subjective. There is no correct way to do it. You ask a whole bunch of different people how they do it, and everyone is going to come up with a different option. This is personally what I do, but again, this would be different for if I had a different voice. This is just for my particular voice in my particular setup. And this changes. This is one of the things that changes the most. What I've personally done is I've added a little bit. You can see up here, that's how much I'm either adding or cutting of those frequencies. I've added a little bit on band 2 to the lower end. I've taken away quite a bit, almost -5 dB, around the 500 hertz range. I personally find if there is this, for some reason, this range just sounds muffled to me, or I guess they call it boxy or muddy. It sounds unclear. And if I pull out a bit in that area, it starts to sound a lot clearer to me. Then Anything over 1K, you want to be careful with. The human range of hearing between 1.5 and 5K, or 1,500 and 5,000 hertz, is very, very sensitive. So anything you do in this area is going to sound more aggressive than if you do something in the lower frequencies. I would not touch this more than 1 or 2 dB. And you can see I've boosted it a bit because I find it brings clarity if I'm boosting the, what have I got, around 2K. And then I boosted the top end a bit as well. But overall, I haven't done a lot here. Next up, I have the RX10D clicker. I love this thing. This thing is the best thing since sliced bread. Again, not very many parameters, not much to do here. I use low latency mode because that apparently is the best mode for mouth clicks. Digital clicks are often much faster. You'll see a really quick spike if you're looking at a waveform very, very close in, or you're looking at the frequency spectrogram. Spectrogram, yes. Mouth clicks, because we've got saliva and other things, they might have a tail, they might be a bit wider, so I'm just using what they have told me to use that is best for mouth clicks because they have programmed this contraption. I have not. Frequency skew, I set this slightly towards the high frequency because it detects more clicks, but also mouth clicks tend to sit in that range. Click widening, I've put a little bit on there because, again, as I said, mouth clicks tend to have a bit of a they're not always as sharp and short as digital clicks. So I have widened that a bit. Sensitivity is what I tend to scroll up and down with until I find a range of where we're getting enough clicks there, but we're not cutting into my dialogue. Again, this is one that's great to look at output clicks only. That's when you're going to start to hear it. And I'm so sorry for playing this because once you hear it, then you start hearing all these noises in your audio and it's terrible. But we will go output clicks only, and I'm going to scroll through the sensitivity so you can hear. There's some fabulous noises in there when you start listening to mouth clicks, and once you've started doing that and outputting clicks only, you're going to start hearing all of that in your recording, and it's just really unpleasant, but as is the life of a voiceover artist. So that gets rid of a whole bunch of gross noises. Then I have, this is a compressor. It is neither a default Reaper compressor or the RX compressor. This is a free compressor, Tokyo Dawn Labs. Kotelnikov, I don't know how you pronounce it, but I like it, so that's why I use this one. Free to download, and you can install it and use it within this piece of software. What compression does, and the reason I put it on at the end is, compression brings the quietest bits of your audio and the highest, loudest bits of your audio closer together. So it's easier. I like putting it on at the end because, especially with gating, where you're trying to get rid of the quietest bits down the bottom, if you started to bring the audio closer together at the beginning, it makes all of the other effects, it's harder for them to do their job. All of these effects are applied in a linear way, so it will run through the gate first, then the de-esser, then the first EQ, then it'll run in that order. So I'll always stick my compressor on at the end after all the other effects have been done. What the compressor does is you've got your threshold level. When the audio goes above that, it will start to compress according to the ratio you've set. So really, it brings the loudest parts down so they are closer to the quietest parts. And then what I do is I add some makeup gain to bring the volume of the whole thing back up because I am technically bringing the volume down. I personally like having a quick attack and a longer release. I find it sounds a bit more natural, and the reason I have the compressor on there is usually because the sounds at the start of sentences tend to be louder. Like, do you know, it's a very quick sound and it starts very quickly, that burst of air. So we want to attack it quickly and squish it a bit. You'll see the gain reduction as it plays here. If you're going over 5 dB of reduction, I think that's too much. I tend to keep it much, much less aggressive. I do know that if you are doing voice demos and you have them professionally produced, especially I've found the American producers tend to really compress audio hard, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's personal preference. But for my own auditions and my own demos and client work, I don't add a lot of compression because I think it sounds weird. I'll play through this and just watch the gain reduction. Well, here's the story for you. Sarah Perry was a veterinary nurse who had been working daily at an old zoo in a deserted district of the territory. So she was very happy to start a new job at a... You can see that I've got it, it's only really impacting the starts of sentences, the louder sounds. That's all I really want. I don't want it to be too aggressive. Then I have on here a rear limit, which is the default limiter within Reaper. It doesn't actually do much. I have it there as a brick wall ceiling at -1 dBFS because, as I said, don't want peaks going over that. I don't think this is actually doing anything because the levels I've set throughout are really not that high. But if anything happens to go over -1 dB, it's going to just compress it flat so that I don't have anything peaking or being crushed. Otherwise, it's not doing anything. Finally, I do have one more thing on here. This is an effect. This isn't an effect. It is just a monitor. It is my De-Ess loudness meter. This is a default within Reaper. It'll show you where your clip is peaking. So it'll show you your peaks and it shows you LUFS M, LUFS S, and LUFS I. LUFS is your average loudness. LUFS M is momentary. It's over about a 400 millisecond period, your average volume over a very, very short period. LUFS F is short term, so that's over 3 seconds. What we want to look at is LUFS I, LUFS integrated. That is your average volume over the clip you have just played. So if I play through this clip, keep an eye on the number that pops up under LUFS I and the number that peaks. Well, here's the story for you. Sarah Perry was a veterinary nurse who had been working daily at an old zoo in a deserted district of the territory. So she was very happy to start a new job at a superb private practice in North Square near the Duke Street Tower. So, we peaked at -3.1, my average volume's -21. That's totally fine. As an audition, I'd submit that. If I were doing a demo, I might make it a bit louder, because we've got some headroom at the top and this average volume could be louder. I might compress it a bit more and then pull it up. But for an audition, this is perfectly fine. And the reason I put that on at the end, again, is because that means all of the effects are being applied before it tells me these stats. There's no point having a loudness meter on at the start and then adding 8 effects after it because it's going to be telling you these statistics with relation to your original audio, not your treated audio. And that's really what I do to my audio. Keep in mind, this is what I use for my auditions and my jobs. Most of my work is corporate and commercial. If I know there is an audio engineer on board for a bigger commercial job, which usually there will be, I send them raw audio. Or I might send them the raw audio and a version I've run through my effects so they can choose what to use. But for my corporate clients, I will run it through this because it just sounds nicer to them. They have to do less work on their end. And for my auditions, this is what I do, unless they've specifically said, we don't want treated audio, don't treat your audio. But most of the time, this is what I'm using. It will differ if you are doing things like audiobooks because ACX has a very stringent list of requirements for how your audio has to sound. This is why if you are doing audiobooks, I recommend factoring into your cost an external editor because after you've recorded the whole thing, the last thing you want to do is have to go through and edit it and mix and master it to those specific requirements. But if you are going to do that, check the ACX website because they have all of the specs you need to make sure you are following, or they will not allow the audiobook to be uploaded onto their platform. Hopefully you found that useful. Editing audio is always going to be a difficult thing to show people how to do because it is so dependent on your space, your equipment, your voice. So it really is different for everyone. That is why I highly recommend the ear training, because as your ear starts to get better, you will be able to workshop your own presets. So you can see what other people do, take from that what you will, but really it comes down to your space, your equipment, your voice. If you've got any other questions about voiceover or anything else, I like to make cooking videos, recipes, whatever, stick them down in the comments and I will try and answer as many of them as I can, or make some more videos because I'm back in action now and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. If you also are in the process of trying to get a voiceover career going and you want a lot more guidance, I've put together what I believe is the most comprehensive course out there. It is a lot of content, but it gives you everything you need to know from start to finish of building a voiceover business, because that is what I spend my weeks doing, running a voiceover business. From the business side of things, marketing, actually getting the work, putting your voiceover demos together, editing audio, getting your space set up, all of that. You can check that out in the description below as well. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful week.